All right, Councilmember Domb, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Larry.
The first thing I'd like to ask about is going back in time a little bit. At the end of June, City Council passed the budget, and I was wondering if you were satisfied with how that budget came out, and what you liked about it, and what are some things that you think could have been done differently.
I'm never perfectly satisfied, but it was an okay budget. I would have liked to have seen us invest the money on evaluating the different programs that we've invested money in the gun violence area and public safety in order to determine what's working and what's not working. I think that's very important. And public safety, Larry, is our #1 issue right now. A recent Pew poll showed 71% of the people in Philadelphia feel that public safety is the #1 issue by far. Everything else was below 20%. So I just want to make sure that we're making all these investments and all these different programs that they're effective. I mean, we don't want to find out a year from now we wasted X amount of dollars. I think we should really analyze them on a monthly or quarterly basis and determine what's working and what isn't working. And when it is working, let's invest more in what's working. And when it's not working, let's figure out why it's not working and either change direction or adjust it or go in another direction, and invest the money wisely that way, because it's a lot of money we're investing to try to get public safety under control.
All right. One of the key components of this budget were tax cuts. So can you walk us through your support of the tax cuts and what impact you think they'll have?
Well, in the big picture, I had 2 bills last May that we put forward. One was reduction of the wage tax, one was a reduction of the net income tax. And they were more dramatic reductions than what we passed, but at least what we passed is a good start. And we did this based on the following facts. And that is from 2009 to 2018, in the United States, all jobs created, those that paid less than $35,000, the percentage was 29% in the US. Top cities, all jobs created that paid less than $35,000, the percentage was 28%. In the city of Philadelphia, now remember the national average is 29% and cities are 28. In the city of Philadelphia, all jobs that we developed in that 10-year span that paid less than $35,000, the percentage was 60.5, double everybody else. And people said to us, well, why is that? Why is that happening? And then when you look at the facts, just speak to the facts, for businesses, the local and state tax burden, the highest in the country is New York City at 16.2. The second highest in the country is Philadelphia at 16.1. The third highest in the United States is California at 8.8. They're like half of us. Chicago is 7, we're 16.1. Boston is 7, we're 16.1. Atlanta is 4. Forget Texas and Florida. And my point here is that if you're a company in the city and you want to expand against that backdrop of 16.1, you're really rethinking, should you go to the suburbs instead of expanding in the city? And that's what's been happening. All of the good paying jobs that pay $35,000 to $100,000 are going out to the suburbs. We have half those jobs that the suburbs have. We have not attracted them. And recently, in the last week or two, you may have seen the information that came out of the 10 largest companies in the city. Only one, I think it's Comcast, is private sector. We're not attracting large companies which have large employment, which you need to understand. When you attract a large company like a Comcast, and I always say every day, thank God they're here. Thank God, because there's something called the economic job. There's something called, that's okay. There's something called the economic job multiplier. For every job that Comcast has in the city, the job multiplier is 4 to 1. So they have 12,000 people here. They're really attributing 48,000 additional jobs. It's huge. So, the reason for these tax cuts was to attract existing businesses to expand in the city and hopefully attract others outside the city to come here. This is a good start. We lowered the net income from 6.2 to 5.99, the lowest it's been in 30 years. And we slightly adjusted the wage tax. I think it's sending the right messaging, but this needs to continue. When we had these tax bills last year, we were going to lower the net income from 6.2 to 0 over a 10-year period. And the analysis done by a local firm analyzed that if we did that with the combination of the wage tax and a 10-year period, we would create 100,000 new jobs, the biggest growth the city ever saw. So there's clearly a correlation of taxing these businesses with this net income tax and creating new jobs. You need to lower these taxes in order to bring more jobs into the city. And the best way, Larry, out of poverty is a good paying job. There's no question about it. You know, people say we have a housing problem, and we do. But the average cost of housing in the city of Philadelphia, the top 20 cities, we're at the bottom. We're at the bottom. But the other problem is that the average income of the top 20 cities, we're definitely at the bottom. We have more of an income problem. If we can raise the bar on the income, it'll make housing affordability easier for our residents.
So the tax cuts that were passed in June were modest. They're very small. They're in terms of what the average person's going to save. It's not a lot. And would you see in the future, next year, the year after, so on and so forth, reducing the taxes even farther, trying every year, every other year? What does that look like to you?
I think it's an absolute must. I think we, you know, like any government, we need to invest in the city of Philadelphia. And investing in the city of Philadelphia means how do we grow the tax-paying base? And that's really crucial. How do you improve the city and how do you grow the tax-paying base so we have all the dollars basically to support the services that the city needs to provide? And if you keep taxing the existing people, they're going to leave. And we already saw this past year, we had a $25,000 reduction in the population of the city. One of the first times in the last several years we've seen a reduction. We need to see an increase. We need to bring more people to the city of Philadelphia and increase the tax-paying base. And this is one of the best ways to do it, as it was shown in that economic study done by lowering that net income and the wage over a 10-year period. If you can lower it to zero, it would create 100,000 new jobs. That's huge for the city.
And so one of the things that I was wondering about, though, so we're going to see a reduction in revenue anytime we reduce taxes. And, you know, we're always talking about how every dollar counts in that budget. Do you see the direct correlation between the tax reduction and more revenue generated because we would have more workers? Is that how you're looking at it?
Yes. What we're saying really is by lowering the overall tax burden, one, will keep the existing businesses that are here, who especially today, when they have choices that they can go anywhere and work, it's important that we are competitive. We're not an island. People can easily go over the borders of the city of Philadelphia and have a different taxation policy for their company. So we need to be more competitive. You know, for many years, we kept raising, for example, the wage taxes. People would leave the city and we decide we would raise the wage taxes. So picture this, Larry. It's like you and I own a store, okay? We have 100 customers coming to the store. And all of a sudden we drop down to 90 and then we raise the prices of the store. And what do the people say? I'm not going. Now we're down to 80. And what do? We raise the prices again. And we kept doing that until we were down to like 40 customers. The answer isn't really to raise the prices. The answer is how do you attract more customers to the store?
So, but do you feel that that has worked historically in other places where we talk about reducing taxes and then we see this uptick in revenue because of it? It's one of those things that, and I'm not an economist, and I have very little business acumen, as Denise will tell you, because we run our own company. But it seems to me that in other places that have tried this, especially globally, that really hasn't been the case. So what about Philadelphia would be different so that this could take effect like we're talking about here?
First of all, hello, Denise. How are you? I would say this. Well, here's what's different. Go back to when Governor Rendell was Mayor Rendell. You had a wage tax that was over 5%. He was the first mayor who put in place tax reductions. They might have been slight, but they were reductions over time. And over time, those reductions sent the right messaging to the business community and the businesses. You know, everyone loves jobs. A lot of people don't like the owners of the companies for whatever reason. They should love them because they are the people that are employing people. That whole thing has to change. And when Rendell did was lower that wage tax over a 10 or 15-year period and lower some of the business taxes, we actually saw the first years of growth. That's when growth occurred. And it occurred because that tax reduction was in place. It doesn't happen overnight because companies make plans. It takes a year, 2, 3, or 4. But when you send the right signals to people that, you know what, we're open for business, we want to be competitive, we appreciate you being here, we love the hospitality of you being here. Thank God you're here. Okay, thank God you're in the city of Philadelphia doing business. That is very important to expanding that base. And I do think that this sends the right message.
Okay. Now, moving forward, in the short term, what are some of the key areas City Council should be addressing this fall?
I think we need to continue to address the public safety issues. I think we need to bring all law enforcement together in a way that they can work as a team. I think we need to continue to address the issues of poverty and how we can help people climb out of poverty. We need to address the education in the city. And of course, I would say the housing crisis, especially for the homeless situation. And in general, the quality of life. So many people say to me right now that the quality of life is not as good as it was 6 or 7 years ago. They almost feel as if they're paying more taxes, but not getting the same services they got 7 years ago. So there's a value proposition. And there's some of the basics, like making sure the streets are clean, making sure the trash is picked up on time, making sure city employees are hospitable to our constituents who are their customers. I think we need to institute in government a different philosophy. Thank God people live in the city of Philadelphia because they're the ones who pay all of our salaries. They are the customers of the city. We should be answering the phones of the city saying, thank you for calling the city of Philadelphia. How may we help you? Probably most people, if we answered that way, would pass out from that. But it's so important to change the hospitality side of the city, because more so today, Denise and Larry, people have choices. They don't have to live in Philadelphia. They can live in other places and still work, in a Philadelphia company. We need to make sure that the quality of life and that we attract them to the city. On the education front, I've talked several times about this, and that is that we need to institute, and I know that the school district is starting to institute part of these programs. We need to make it mandatory from kindergarten to 12th grade, the teaching of financial literacy, technology, entrepreneurship, and then in 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th grade, allow students the option, not a requirement, the option to work 1 day a week in a job, get paid, get credit, and hopefully get a summer job. I think it's a game changer. High school student would have 4 different job experiences, would be exposed to a company, would probably get summer work, would get them on the right track, and they could mentor with people that are in the workforce. And especially now when you need labor, here's a tremendous talent pool for us to train the residents of the city and teach them all these different opportunities.
Much has been made, especially in our program here, about the recent reassessments in property taxes. How do we tackle rising property values that are making Philadelphia really increasingly unaffordable?
Well, let me say this. In the last analysis, when I looked at the actual numbers, okay, you have to understand that the city council, along with the administration, put forth several relief programs to help homeowners. And I think raising that homestead exemption to $80,000 from the current 45, when you look at the charts, roughly, I believe half of the homeowners in the city did not see an increase from that level. Pretty astonishing. In fact, many saw a decrease. No one wants to talk about that, but that's the facts of the numbers. Now, there were some people who saw some dramatic increases. Many of those cases, that's because the taxes the assessed values were incorrect by far for a very long period of time. And for those people who can't afford the taxes, we have different programs that can help them. We have the long-time owner-occupied program called LOOP, which was increased from 25 million to 35 million. That basically helps those who've lived in their homes for 10 years or more and meet certain income qualifications. We also have the senior tax freeze, and we added another close to $8 million for increased senior tax freezes, so we can freeze the taxes of some of the seniors who are on fixed incomes, and I understand that. And of course, we also have the UPA program for those that owe back taxes. UPA is the owner-occupied payment agreement. And we have some of the most liberal, progressive programs of any city in the country. And UPA basically says, based on your income, Allan, We will charge you the real estate taxes that you can afford. And it can be as little as $25 a month or $10 a month, or it could even be zero. I don't know anyone that has that type of program available. The problem in many times is that our residents aren't aware of these programs. And I would say that this is our fault because we have not done a great job in marketing them, and people are just not aware of them. But we have some great programs. We just have to get the word out.
Do you have concerns just in general that real estate prices have been going up and up across the city? Now, I understand that there's market factors involved in that, and that might come back down. But one of the things that I've been hearing for a long time now is that Philadelphia is a great midpoint between New York and Washington because it's more affordable and people live here and work in those areas. Is there any concern that that may not be the case because it is getting more expensive here?
Because you have to understand, real estate globally and across the US has increased dramatically across the board. If anything, the increases in Philadelphia may have been 1 percentage point higher or 2 percentage points higher than other areas. But that's because when you're looking at percentages, those other areas were already dramatically higher. So if New York's average price, for example, was 600,000, and they only go up 8%, that's 40,000. Whereas in Philadelphia, if your home was 200,000 and it went up 8%, that would be 16. So the percentages can throw people off. So understand that even after these increases, Philadelphia is still one of the most affordable cities in the country. And again, I go back to the issue is that across the US, housing prices went up. But what we need to focus on more so than we are today is making sure the residents of the city see their incomes go up. We need better paying jobs. We need those $35,000 to $100,000 family sustaining jobs. Look at that, go back to that figure. We doubled the output of low paying jobs in this city. That's not good. We need to change that whole equation.
I'd like to bring in Denise Clay Murray here on Philadelphia Hall Monitor.
Hi, Councilman. Thank you so much for giving us your time today.
Sure.
But let's get back a little bit to the whole job situation, the $35,000 to $100,000 a year jobs. Basically, by cutting business taxes, you are giving businesses a benefit. How does city council or the mayor or anybody make sure that that benefit is passed on to the workers? Because, and this is just my experience, most of the time when a business has gotten a tax cut, that hasn't necessarily been passed on to the people who actually do the work.
Well, I can give you lists of companies who have moved out of the city because of the taxes that the city is charging, specifically the borough. There's a company called Mother's Works. I don't know if you remember that company. They were up on Spring Garden. I think they make clothes for women that were pregnant. They moved over to Jersey basically because of the tax issues. So when you're a business, think about this. You're looking at either expanding in the city or going to the suburbs, okay? Instead of paying the net income in the city, you don't have the net income in the suburbs. Where do you think you're gonna go? And the proof of the pudding, take a tour of King of Prussia, Malvern, Valley Forge, Devon, and you can see what's going on there. They don't have the 6.2% net income tax that we do. So the companies have made the decision to locate out there. That means the jobs for Philadelphians, if they get them, they got to commute out there, which many of them, some do, but not enough. If we had them in the city, we'd have more jobs in the city. That's our point. And the other part of this is that when you're in a new company looking, I mean, how do you speak to this issue? 10 of the largest companies in our city, one is private sector. And that's because the other 9 don't pay the net income tax. 1 is private sector. That's kind of a disgrace. We're probably the only city that has that problem. I mean, other companies are all over the place in cities and they're not in Philadelphia. Our major companies are out in the suburbs. And that's because of the net income. Now, does that hurt job creation? Absolutely. If we had those companies in the city, you'd have those jobs in the city. We have lost large companies and we're not attracting new ones. And it's because of the structure. And Denise, think of it this way. You're thinking of coming to the city of Philadelphia. You hear that New York's taxes, local and state, are 16.2. You hear that Philadelphia is 16.1. And you can go to Chicago or Boston and pay 7%. Or Atlanta, you can pay 4%. Where are you going?
Well, you're probably going to Atlanta, but the point I'm trying to make here is if you cut taxes for businesses, how do we know that the citizens of Philadelphia are going to benefit from that in terms of wages? Because let's face it, that's not always where the savings from that tax cut go. What can city council and the mayor do to make sure that the money that these businesses are not going to have to pay because of this reduction in taxes actually gets spent on creating jobs in Philadelphia that actual Philadelphians can afford to stay here?
Let's use your example. You said you'd probably go to Atlanta. If the taxes were on an equal level, you'd probably come to Philadelphia. And those jobs then would be available for Philadelphians that are good paying jobs. Just look at the suburbs where the good paying jobs have occurred. There are several companies who've gone through the process of looking at the suburbs versus the city and have gone to the suburbs or expanded in the suburbs because of the tax structure. You know, I had a dinner with 12 or 13 life science companies who told me that the issues for them as they become profitable is this net income tax, because then they're taxed on their net income and they're going out to the suburbs where they don't have that tax. So all those jobs in many ways, you know, basically go out to the suburbs and don't stay in the city. We need the jobs in the city. And so while the tax benefit may go to the company, but in the long run, in the big picture, the big benefit are the jobs that that company creates in the city where we get paid city wage taxes, where we get them to buy goods and services in the city, where we get taxes, where we help our local entrepreneurs. The economic benefits of having those companies in the city is huge. And what we have to do is everything possible to attract them into the city. That is key. Having a company in Valley Forge doesn't really help Philadelphia. It's okay, but it doesn't help the city. We're not seeing any economic benefit. When you have a company in the city, what do the workers do for lunch? Where do they go? They go to the local stores and the small businesses to eat. They go there to shop. It helps the whole economy. It is crucial to have these companies in the city, crucial.
Okay, now, how does this benefit small businesses, if at all?
Oh, there's huge benefit. The biggest voice we heard, and the reason why this legislation passed was because of the diverse chambers of commerce. The African-American chamber, the Asian chamber, the Hispanic chamber, every chamber came to us and said, our small business owners are getting crushed by the net income tax. They were the biggest voices. In fact, my colleagues on council were all lobbied by every one of them, and they heard it firsthand that this was a big, big issue for a small business, especially when they can go out to the counties or Jersey and not have this tax. You have to remember that we're no longer an island called the city of Philadelphia. We compete and we're in a competitive market. When the taxes are Philadelphia specific, people have choices and they move out.
Now, in terms of housing, you've made your career before you became a city council person was in housing. What is it that we're doing wrong, in terms of housing as a city, in terms of making sure that people can possibly find affordable housing and different things? What are we doing wrong as a city and how do we correct that?
I think we need to revisit the whole program of our housing. And I think we need to look at the private sector to convene and figure out how we can make housing affordable. And I'll give you one example, and not to get into the weeds, but one example would be, we're going to start to utilize this because I've introduced it. There's something in the mortgage business called a mortgage buy down, okay? Where we as a city or a seller could buy down the interest rate in order to make housing more affordable. It's very inexpensive to do. It can be done on any loan. FHA happens to be a great program where you can take today's rates as an example. Denise and Larry, let's say the rate today is 5.25. We can buy the rate down to 3.5 or 3.75 for a small amount of money, 3 or 4% of the loan amount. So I think we need to be more creative in making housing affordable. Now I'm talking about home ownership, but I think the private sector has a lot of creative ideas on how we can do this, and we need to work with them and not against them in order to accomplish the goal. We should give them the goal. This is what we need. We need 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 affordable housing units in this section, whatever it is, and ask them to figure out how we can come up with a solution.
Now, generally, when housing developments are brought before council, there's a certain percentage of affordable housing that is supposed to be a part of those projects. And it never completely seems to get to that percentage. How do we hold these companies accountable? Because, there are people like myself and my husband who would love to come back to Philly to live because we love it here and we really enjoy living in the places in Philly we've lived. But our economics right now are saying you can't afford to stay here.
Where are you living now, Denise?
Well, we're living in Wilmington, Delaware, but that's more a question of him teaching at Bowie State, me doing my stuff in Philadelphia, and us needing to find something equally inconvenient for everybody.
So I will say this, we do have affordable housing in the city. I know in fact, council is working on a program with Council President Clark, where we're going to be building, I think, almost 1,000 homes that are going to be about $250,000 per home. I know that may sound like a high number, but compared to the rest of the market for a brand new home and at today's interest rates, it's somewhat affordable, especially if we do the buy down. So there is affordability. Now, as far as holding people accountable, in the past, there was always an alternative of either they paid money into a housing trust fund or they built a certain amount of affordable units. I think recently in certain districts, they've passed a requirement that it will have to be a certain amount of affordable units in that development. But in the past, there was always an option. And I think most developers paid into the housing trust fund monies, which then goes to helping home repairs, people who need their homes fixed up, which is a good thing too.
Now, the 10-year tax abatement, when it was originally put together, was designed to entice developers to come into the city and build and develop and redevelop housing. There are certain sections of the city that there's this perception that it might be time for us to look at the 10-year tax abatement and say, okay, it's done its job here, and maybe we need to stop doing it. Do you see that? I mean, is that something you agree with, or do you think that we just need to spread the 10-year tax abatement out so that it hits more neighborhoods, because it doesn't necessarily always hit the neighborhoods?
Well, the 10-year tax abatement has been phased down effective January 1 of 2022 to roughly, works out to be roughly a 5-year abatement, half of what it was on residential, and I believe 90% of what it was for commercial. So basically, commercial lost 10% and residential lost 50% of the benefit. So it is being phased down over time. That is occurring. But here's the issue. Up until 1997 or 98, before the tax abatement, and I was in the real estate business, I never saw a new home being built in the city of Philadelphia. That's almost 20 years. I never saw one being built. Not one new home was built. We had no growth, zero. And that is because the cost of construction and the labor exceeded the cost you could sell it for. And when the tax abatement occurred, it kind of balanced out the equation that someone could go in and build a new home and be able to sell it, at least for the monies that cost them, and make a small profit. But before that, you never saw new construction. There was no new construction in the city, zero. So the tax abatement, in my opinion, worked like a charm. And it worked really well, and now it's being adjusted. In the big picture, if we would fix our tax structure and create the demand in the city, you wouldn't need a tax abatement. But the tax abatement is one of 21 Band-Aids the city uses to patch over the problems of our tax structure. If we really were serious, we would restructure the total tax structure, and then you wouldn't need the abatement. Because if you restructure the taxes, you'll create the demand. You'll raise the prices, but you'll create the demand that you won't need an abatement.
Okay, well, one last question. Of all the council people, you are the person who has decided not to necessarily take your salary, but to use that salary for schools. You give it to an individual school every year. One, how do you select which school you do this with every year? And two, what are you hearing from these schools? And I mean, in terms of how they've been able to use the money to improve the quality of education for the kids at that school.
Every school is different. And before the pandemic, the process was I would visit the school, talk to the principal, ask the principal what they needed, and we would provide them with a grant for what they needed for the school. Every school had a different requirement. Since the pandemic, it's been a little more challenging, but I know that we are working now on, we purchased several, I don't know how many, 900 books about Juneteenth to distribute to different schools to tell the story of Juneteenth. I know we're working with a boxing program, after school program with Bernard Hopkins in one or two of the schools. So we are trying to figure out ways to really help the schools. But I would say this, I think we've donated, I guess it's been almost 6 or 7 years, so it's probably more than $500,000 to different schools. But I think the biggest thing is that for that individual school that just needed a little extra something, it made a difference. And they were very appreciative of it. It could have been anything from AV equipment that they needed or new computers they needed, whatever they needed. It was a grant, not to be paid back, just for the principal to decide how it should be used.
Okay. Do you ever go back to those?
Denise, sorry, there was another usage I did. And
Okay.
that was, I paid for 178 public school teachers to take financial literacy courses at the Federal Reserve when people were meeting in person. This is before the pandemic. So we trained 178 public school teachers to teach financial literacy from kindergarten to 12th grade in the public school system. And if you consider that the average class size is 25 to 30, hopefully those 178 teachers are teaching close to 5,000 students.
Okay. Well, thank you, Councilman. I'm going to turn you back over to Larry McGlynn, my co-host here, and we're back with more of Hallmonitor.
Thank you. Denise,
Yes.
Thank you,
talk to your
Denise.
husband about moving back to the city, please.
He is looking for a professor job in Philly as we speak.
Okay, good.
Councilman, I just have one last question for you before we let you go here. And this is a long-term question. It's a hypothetical. We are, whether we like it or not, we are in already the 2023 mayoral race. And what I was wondering, when we talk about what the future mayor needs, what kind of mindset they should have, what should we be looking for?
I think number one is leadership and vision for the city, and to set out a leadership vision of where Philadelphia is today, where it should be the next year, 5 and 10 and 20 years. I also think you need the number one cheerleader for the city of Philadelphia to always look at the glass half full and never, ever half empty. My father always used to say to me, when life gives you lemons, you need to make lemonade. And you need a cheerleader that supports every resident of the city, supports every business, wants to expand the economic base, and will work teamwork wise on law enforcement to bring all the law enforcement together to work on improving dramatically the public safety issue. That is really, really important, public safety. And you need a leader that's going to accomplish that goal. And I will say this, I think every job is 51% hospitality and 49% technical. That includes what you guys do, what I do, the mayor's job. You have to be 51% hospitality and 49% technical. You have, in that next position, that person needs to love people and to love the fact that they want to help people. You have to want to help people, and you have to derive inner feelings and gratitude when you help someone else without any credit. Like, do all the work and give away the credit. That's what we need.
All right, Councilmember Allan Domb, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you both. Thank you, Denise. Thank you, Larry.